That is actually a good like kind of segue into some of the like I know you wanted to talk like gear and stuff like that, but I mean there's so much to like having done it now for the first time. There's the way that I view that hunt is totally different than I had it in my head from like a gear standpoint and what I thought I needed versus what I actually needed.
What is up, everybody? We have a full house, a packed house. I have Mr. Erik Barber to my right, Mr. Sawyer. Yeah, I've known you for like 7 years.
Sawyer.
Can't get your name right.
It's my nickname in grade school.
Sawyer Briel across from me, and virtually joining us, our very good friend, Mr. Brad Brooks. Good friend in general, also from Argali Outdoors. So if you need some sweet tents or game bags or knives, visit Argali Outdoors. You might even talk to Brad. I don't know. Does anybody talk to you anymore, Brad?
You know, well, first of all, I couldn't have done a better plug myself, Mark. And believe it or not, yes, my phone still rings and I still talk to people occasionally.
Well, you got the personality for it. I know that.
It's good to see you guys.
Oh, my
I
God.
I know. We miss it.
It's like sitting across from Johnny Carson. I'm in stitches over here, Mark.
Yeah.
Hey,
he's on fire.
I'm telling you what. Brad brings out the best in me.
Gosh.
Like Brad, you're pure
glowing.
joy.
You're glowing.
You're pure joy. And you mentioned, if anybody was listening closely, you brought up Kodiak, which we're fresh off a trip to Kodiak Island chasing Sitka blacktails, the topic of this conversation today, this podcast that we're doing right now. Epic trip. Logistically complex. I know we've been planning it for, I don't know, like a year, more than
Literally a year.
Long time.
And I think that's kind of generally any Alaska hunt, but we're going to talk specifically about this one today because it's definitely worth doing. This is like 100%, might be the coolest trip I've ever been on. It's definitely in my top 3. And I'll caveat that with, or not caveat it, but I find it interesting that personally, my top 3 trips are all chasing Sitka blacktails, twice on Kodiak. So I guess it goes to show like really how cool that place is. Now, Brad, you hunted that place a fair amount.
I've hunted it a few times. Yeah, it's one of my favorite places. Just like I know it's not technically Southeast Alaska, but I just think that that part of Alaska in particular, that Aleutian chain, is one of the most. It reminds me of what Jurassic Park is like. It feels like it should have dinosaurs on it, and it's hard to describe. But when you fly over, you're like, surely there's some dinosaur creatures down there. And then you look, and there are giant brown bears, so it kind of feels like it fits.
I was going to say, there's some things crawling around there that aren't far off and are probably leftovers from that period. I mean, it's. You're going to see brown bears when you go there. And that's one of the considerations that we have here during your planning process. If you're looking at doing this trip, definitely something you need to keep in mind, before the trip and while you're there.
Yeah. But yeah, I love Kodiak and I love Southeast Alaska. I don't know why exactly. There's just something about the place and blacktails specifically that are just so much fun to hunt. And it just has not gotten old for me yet, Mark. So I was really glad to be able to share that with you guys because I thought we had a fun crew of and it was, I don't know if you can cuss on your podcast, but it was poor weather. I'm gonna try and use my family voice, family mouth.
We can edit out poor, Brad. That's fine.
that was me cursing Sawyer. Poor weather, but we had just like a great crew and a fun time, and a handful of giant deer were killed, which I just feel like that was like icing on the cake. So it was I'm with you, Mark. Like it was one of the most fun trips I've done, and for me, I do a lot of like hunting alone all over the place, and I enjoy that for what that is. But sharing a hunt with friends I don't know that there's anything that's more enjoyable for me than that. And I don't get a chance to do it with enough people. So it was just super fun for me, both because it was a great hunt, but also because we got to do it together.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. There's something, maybe it's a little bit of where I grew up on, essentially on the west side of Washington on the coast, but the coastal regions of Alaska are definitely just super special, beautiful, unique. I mean, you're just, whether it's Southeast or Kodiak, I mean, there's definitely differences, but there's similarities there. And like you said, I mean, in my opinion, it's one of the most unforgiving places on the planet. And somehow by the end of the trip, you want to go back again. So, and I'm not saying that it wasn't fun while we were there, because it was it was a blast. But there's definitely, I mean, it can be sketch for sure, and I feel like the trip that we had, we got a taste of everything. We had some nice weather, not a lot, and then we had some weather on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, and everything in between.
Yeah, I mean, where else can you do? Okay, we shot deer, caught salmon, and seafood, almost in the same day. Mark, remember, we caught a crab. Don't forget that, the dungy. Don't forget about the dungy.
Which I do think was legal. I think he would have made it. We put him back.
Hey, you made the right call.
We made the right call. We weren't exactly sure. I didn't have the shellfish regulations in front of me.
Sure.
Illegal crab just isn't as sweet. Yeah. You hear a million people say that, Mark.
As the old adage goes, as Grandpa used to say. I think he actually used to say those ones were sweeter. But no, man, that's cool. Well, what we're kind of going in, trying to provide at least a little bit of an outline for folks who may be interested in doing a trip like this. And I would say, don't make it. It's probably not your first hunt that you've ever been on. It's probably not your first backcountry hunt that you've ever been on. Not that you can't do that, but you kind of have to have your stuff together, or go with people who have done it before, like yourself, Brad, that know the ropes, know the gear you need, know what to expect, and can kind of assist with guiding somebody through the process leading up to, and then also while you're there a little bit. But when you start planning a trip like this, Brad, what's your step one?
My step one is getting some dates on a calendar and booking a bush flight if you're going to do a bush flight. So get those, commit to it, get some dates on the calendar, and then everything else. I'm a firm believer that once you have some skin in the game, you've spent some money, you got a down payment, you got a deposit down, you're going to figure out everything else to make it happen, more than likely, because you don't want to forfeit the money. So step one is get your dates, figure it out, get yourself a bush pilot booked, and then you can sort of go from there.
That really is actually a really, really good point, and I wouldn't have necessarily thought of that. But otherwise it's just going to be another one of those things we should do a trip like this, and then the next year you're oh, hey, we should do a trip like this.
Yeah.
Wait, didn't we say that last year?
Well, I think the over-the-counter nature of the tag too adds to that flakeability portion of it. You can hem and haw quite a bit because it's not a draw.
Sure.
You can always get the tag. So I think to Brad's point, locking yourself in and mentally knowing I'm going to do this really kind of not forces you, but you're doing it.
You're doing it. And actually the over-the-counter, I guess nature of that tag also allows you to do that. You're not oh man, maybe I'll draw. Do I have enough points? You're no, if I want to do this,
we can start do it.
We can start planning it right now. And then going back to flights, Brad, or I should say your bush flight in, if that's the route you're going to go, which I'd say by and large, the hunt that we went on was the early season, high country, deer up in the alpine. I'd say by and large, folks, I don't know of anybody doing, well, I could be wrong. Are people doing boat-based hunts that time of year? I feel that's always.
No, not many that time of year. Most people do boat-based hunts later in the year, just in general, because the deer are typically down lower. So I would say, the nice thing about blacktails is you can realistically hunt them as a non-resident from August, I want to say, through December. Maybe it even goes a little later than that, depending on where you're at. Maybe completely out of line here, and somebody from Alaska will, I'm sure, correct me on that.
We'll say
I know it goes,
a liberal season.
It's a liberal season, and I know that most people that hunt blacktails as non-residents, and I'm sure residents too, like to do this, but especially non-residents that I know, they like to do it during the rut, which is like late October, early November, primarily because people don't like dealing with bears, or the idea of sleeping with bears is very intimidating to people for understandable reasons. And then also because, you can hunt them down lower. So you can hunt them either on the beach, or you can walk from the beach and not have to walk as far typically. And then also the deer are just in the rut. So they're just not quite as tuned in as they might otherwise be. They don't have females on the brain. So most people like to do that, but you have a large season. And then, picking which time of year, I'd say the other thing is you want to figure out, like, if you're going to go early, like, are you willing to camp? Or are you not willing to camp? There are some, there's plenty of guided operations where you can stay at a lodge and go with the guide if you want to. I really don't think you need to for blacktail. I just really don't think you do. If you have any amount of experience underneath your belt, I don't think it's a hunt where you need a guide. That said, for some people, they may just want one, and there's plenty of options for guided blacktail hunts, but I really think it's an approachable hunt. The last thing I was going to say, Mark, on the planning front, like first step, is I would highly recommend that, people find a reliable friend who's willing to commit to it, not somebody who's going to waffle. So find somebody, who is that reliable person, who's not going to be like, well, yeah, I'm interested, but let me, you need somebody who will tell you, like, I don't know yet, but I'm going to give you an answer by this date. And then by that date, they're going to give you an answer. Like, everybody should have somebody like that in their life. Because when it comes to Alaska, you just can't plan a trip with, this is going to sound harsh, but you can't plan a trip with people who are flaky. It's just, you have somebody just like drop out at the last minute because, their significant other's not happy. Like, that stuff happens and it's real, but also the downstream effect is really annoying. If you're committed and that happens to you.
Yeah, it's not like, the kids had a soccer game. I didn't realize that, it's, you're either in or you're out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Brad, maybe talk a little bit about the finding a bush pilot.
That's exactly where I was going to go, because like those guys get booked up, right?
Yeah. And it's not necessarily something that you just like, type into Google and get a list of like everyone that's accepting right now. Like, maybe walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So I would say just in general in Alaska, there are guides and there are air transporters. A guide is somebody who is going to fly you in and then literally take you on a hunt. So that's a guided hunt. And then there are these air transporters, and they are, by law, they can't guide you. All they can do is take you and drop you and your stuff off and then come pick you up. They're not allowed to take you out hunting. If you go, I think a really popular thing to do in Alaska for like caribou or moose or sheep, as a non-resident, you have to have a guide for some of those species, or brown bear, is you're paying for a guide or you're paying for a drop camp. And I'd say with what we did was we hired an air transporter. And basically what we're paying for is, think of it like a taxi, right? Paying somebody to take you from point A to point B, drop you off, and pick you up. And there are a lot of air transporters out there, and some are better than others, and some are more reliable than others. Some get overbooked themselves, which makes your life more difficult. So it can be hard when you're trying to find an air transporter, to find somebody who is, a good pilot, but also has good customer service and isn't, packing in clients so tight that if there's a bad weather window, you're going to get delayed for 4 days, which is a real thing. And I've had good air transporters and pilots, and I've had some bad experiences with them. And it can be really hard to sort through the good from the bad. And honestly, the only way that I've had to wade through them is really anecdotal experience from people I've talked to. So like, honestly, like, forums are quite helpful. friends that I know who've been up there are helpful. And then sometimes I've just taken gambles. Like I found Willie by Googling his website and calling him and having a conversation with him and just making a gut call from that conversation on whether or not I thought he was a good person. That was it. And he turns out he's a legend, right? He is a phenomenal human being that is everything you ever want in an air transporter. But I had a list of questions for him. And, from that list of questions, you can kind of get a sense of what kind of operation they run. And I would ask them, you essentially are interviewing them. Most people want to know, like, what's your success rate? I don't care about that as much. I think most people obsess too much about what is this X person's success rate. What I want to know is how many clients are you trying to get in and out every year? Tell me about the kinds of delays you've experienced in the past. Like, do you have, are weather delays a big problem for you? And usually you can tell if they're so booked up or they're trying to feed you a line of BS that it's just like, you're like, I just don't have a good feeling about this person. That's just kind of the way you do it. You have to come up with a set of questions to try and ferret out what you're getting yourself into.
Yeah. And like you said, I would imagine, and I'm not a pilot. I don't know if you guys know this about me, but I'm not. And so this is just speculation. Wow. Yeah, I know.
Jeez.
Sorry, I didn't mean to surprise you like this.
Okay. Write that down.
Right here, right now, right? Oh, my gosh. But you kind of, I would think there's some level of, like, making hay while the sun shines, right? As far as, like, you got your peak season, you got your general tourism. Like, we ran into a ton of people back in town. They were just viewing brown bears at various places. Like, they just came up there to watch bears. We got to do that, hunt deer and fish.
Yeah.
We got the triple threat. But also, it's like you want to do that. You want to pack it as, I guess as much as you reasonably can. But then, like you said, like weather delays are a very real thing. I'd say particularly there. I know when I went to Kodiak, many years ago to hunt with my brother, the big planes weren't even getting into the island. And I think that actually happened a couple days before we got here, too. I mean, you're talking like, commercial airliners not getting, with the weather's too bad, visas, whatever, they can't get in. So, I mean, extrapolate that down to, a bush plane, right? And for potentially like multiple days, now you got a lot of clients in the field, you could get backed up pretty bad. And that's, I think that's also just, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but like kind of the nature of the beast too. Like that is just something that can happen regardless if you're a good pilot or if you're overbooked or not overbooked. Like you could spend a couple days on the front end in town or on the back end not getting picked up.
Yep, totally. Yeah, you gotta like your schedule is up to Mother Nature. And you have to just be willing to accept that when you're doing a trip like this and not get wound around the axle on it. So yeah, that's another thing is when you go on a trip like this, you just got to be willing to go with the flow and deal with stuff and not be too uptight about anything. I think I have seen people get really upset when their schedule doesn't go as planned and there isn't anything anybody can do about it. You can't control the weather. Your pilot, you don't want your pilot flying in bad weather for, like that is the last person you want to push into a position they don't want to be in because they're your lifeline, right? So I don't know, maybe it's just me, but if my pilot says he doesn't want to fly, I'm not going to be the person who's like, are you sure? Are you sure? It's like, if he says he doesn't want to fly, like I'm sure there's a good reason why he doesn't want to fly. And I don't want to be in that plane. So
no, I'm going to trust his judgment.
Yeah. And then there's the flip side of it too. And this happened while we were there. He was like, yeah, these other guys were supposed to be in here another 3 days. They had to get out. Like there's going to be times where like, yeah, whether you're going to be stuck 2 days extra, but like just from our small experience, like there's going to be people that want to get the heck out of there too.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
yeah. And that's the other thing. Like we experienced this where, we had 6 or 7 days we're supposed to be in there. And you really don't know. I mean, fog and rain limited our hunting time pretty significantly in that first part of the trip, especially. And sometimes you just don't know. Like you might think I'm going on a 7-day hunt. Well, you might have a day or two to hunt. because you physically can't see anything. So you're going to have to deal with curveballs like that as they come on a trip like this. And I think that part of what you get out of a trip like this is the trip itself, and just wrapping your head around like what you're actually getting is the trip, not necessarily like I'm coming here to kill something. Yes, of course, that's what you want to do when you're hunting. But like, if your idea of success is killing a giant buck like Mark killed, you're probably going to be disappointed because not everybody is Mark Boardman. You know what I mean?
Right.
Oh boy.
Captain Mark, Pilot Mark.
Yeah.
Sir, did the Queen knight you before she passed away?
After, actually.
Yeah.
Oh, the spirit of the Queen.
Posthumously. Yep. I was on the list.
We haven't even gotten into that yet.
I'm gonna look that up.
No. But yeah, that is a very good point. I mean, that was one thing that kind of, I guess, I didn't really consider going into it until we made the decisions to like have hotel buffers and all those different like buffer times, because you don't know what you're gonna get. It's not like hunting back home here where we check the 10-day forecast and it's generally going to be pretty accurate in regards to what's happening. This can change like in the blink of an eye.
Well, even like Liz, my wife, before the trip was like asking a lot of questions. Obviously, she's concerned, wanted to know. And she's like, oh, yeah, what's the plan for like this day? I was like, Liz, it's 9 days. That's literally all I can tell you. Like, and that's what it turned out to be. You might get out early. You might get good weather. You might stay in there. Like, there's just you can't go in with the mindset of like, yep, we're going to hunt for 5 days. Maybe we'll have a day for fishing. Like, you literally cannot plan for that.
All those things are a possibility. Well, like even when we got picked up, one of the reasons we got picked up is because Willie was supposed to pick up some goat hunters, I think, but then he couldn't get in to get those guys because of weather. But where we were at, which probably wasn't even that far away, right. I doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Our weather was fine, and so like the variability of the weather just, from minute to minute, or even just a few miles is like pretty crazy.
Yeah.
What about, well, we should talk about Sawyer's bucks, plural, at some point.
Why?
Because it's cool.
It is cool, but continue, Mark.
Also, I didn't get any questions at home before the trip. Is that bad?
That's a sign, but I mean,
I
wouldn't read too far into it.
See, I was going to tell him to read into it.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
No,
my wife doesn't ask any questions till I get home, Mark. It's okay.
Okay, good.
She doesn't want it. My wife is she doesn't like out of sight, out of mind. She doesn't ask questions about bears. She doesn't ask questions about any of that stuff. She just doesn't want to know about it. And then when I get home, she'll be like, so did you see any bears? And I'll be like, yeah, a few. She'll be like, okay. And like, that's the end of it. Because she's just like
yeah.
doesn't want to know. She's just like, take care of your shit while you're there and we'll be fine. And,
Yeah, have fun getting home safe. I'll see you on the back end.
Yeah.
So hunting Alaska, obviously logistically complex, like we talked about. Costly, right? You've got some of these extra travel components, extra hotel days, potentially, things like that. Where would you say, Brad? I mean, you've hunted Alaska for a fair amount of species. Where does this one stack up from, I guess, from a budgetary perspective, would you say?
It's by far the cheapest. And that's mostly because you have a lot of options. So the number of air transporters for, let's say as a non-resident, if you're looking for an air transport for caribou, for the species you don't need a guide for, which is caribou, moose, and blacktail, the ungulate species. I'm going to leave black bears aside. There's a high demand for caribou and moose, and a limited number, I would say, of places where you can actually hunt those species. There are a lot of blacktail that are dispersed through a fairly large region. This is just me, theorizing about why the cost is lower. And so your ability to access blacktails is a lot higher. You can do it with a float plane. You can do it without a float plane. You can do it from a boat. Whereas those other species, they kind of got you. It's like if you want to hunt caribou, let's just say you want to go to the Arctic. Well, let's just say, just for easy numbers, there are 20 transporters you can go with. And if they have 5,000 people calling them to try and book trips. Well, they're just going to keep increasing their prices because they can only take out so many hunters in a season. So their prices keep going up. And right now the cost of a caribou hunt in particular in Alaska is astronomically high. It's unbelievable how much the cost of an air transport caribou trip has gone up. Blacktail is still fairly affordable because like if you're high, so when you pay typically for a moose or a caribou hunt, your transporter will charge you a flat fee to take you in and out of the field. Let's just say it's $5,000. They'd be like, okay, $5,000 per hunter. With our trip, you're paying for a plane load. The plane load is like, let's say it's $2,500 round trip to take you from point A to point B. Well, it doesn't matter. You can fit up to 4 people in there with small amounts of gear, and you can divide that cost by 4. So Willie and other pilots on Kodiak, and I think this is pretty common with a lot of air transporters who aren't just big game air transporters, they will charge you by the plane load, not per person. And when you do that, it's a lot more cost effective because your bush flight and your commercial flight, those are typically your 2 biggest costs, in addition to the gear if you need to buy a bunch of gear. But let's just say you have most of the gear you need. Those are your 2 biggest costs that you're going to incur. And so it's fairly affordable to hunt blacktail compared to other Alaska species.
Yep. Yeah, I'd even throw in the tag cost, compared to some of the other, quotation mark, more premier species, your moose, your caribou, obviously you got your sheep and your brown bears and things like that. But it's, probably about half maybe in general, I think. The tag cost used to be really the only reasonable thing about hunting Alaska. But then 4 years ago, they doubled it or something like that?
It did, yeah.
At press time 4 years ago.
$300 for a deer tag, and I think a caribou tag is like $750 last time I looked. Mm-hmm. Last time I bought one last year. So yeah, and you can buy up to 3 of them too. So you can ship to 3 blacktail. It's a good, and blacktail don't have the big antlers, unique antlers like caribou or a moose, but damn good eating animal, fun to hunt. I just think it's a really, and here's the other thing too. It's like, I love hunting archery mule deer in the West. And to me, you don't have to hunt, you can hunt them with a rifle or a bow. Last year I did it with a bow and it was so much fun. It reminded me of archery mule deer hunting in the West, but I had 3 tags in my pocket. So it was just, it was a blast.
And I'd say the multiple tag thing is awesome. But even if you get one deer, you kind of have your hands full at that, or you can have your hands full, depending on, where you're at and, what you need to do to get that deer out, when the pilot might be able to come get you to get your meat, and those meat logistics are, just a thing unto themselves as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
What, I'm even trying to think, what's your thought process once you get a deer down out there? Because we had, like I said, a little mix of everything weather, but the clock is kind of ticking.
Yeah, it's warm early season, so, and because it's so wet there, and there aren't really any trees for the most part, right? Especially if you're hunting a little bit higher elevation, like we were. So, my thought process is basically you try and get the meat cooled off as much as you can and air flow around the meat. So, which usually means trying to keep it out of the rain if it's raining, because there's 2 things that are important for meat care to keep them going bad. One is there are 2 things that help prevent bacterial growth. One is cooling off the meat, and the other is drying out the outside of your quarter. So if you can cool it off and then get a nice rind around your meat, that will make it really much more difficult for bacteria to grow and cause your meat to go sour, right? But that time of year, you're on a clock and you do have to get it out. And I don't know if you guys heard this, but Willie mentioned that some of the goat hunters he had that were quite up high, they had their meat spoil on them because they were socked in and he couldn't come in and grab their meat and take it out. So I think you really need to plan on 2 things if you're going early season. One is, just be prepared to get that meat to a place where a pilot can fly it out. So figure out, if you ask your pilot if they can do a meat run, to kind of, and then put it on in a cooler or a freezer for you back in town. Or, go later in the season when it's like getting down to freezing at night or close to freezing, just so you can be out in the field for longer. So,
Brad, maybe that I'm very curious about the whole like avoiding meat spoilage and whatnot, like because that is a real thing early season. The temperatures are warm. The wild card for me was kind of twofold. Like one, you mentioned there's no trees, nothing really to like hang it in to truly get that like 360 degree airflow. But the other thing that was something that I was in the back of my head was the rain. Like it poured on our meat. Sawyer shot a couple bucks early in the trip. Spoiler alert.
Not spoiled, just spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, not spoiled. But then we killed some later in the trip, and Sawyer, yours were exposed to rain at least a couple nights, and I know ours were exposed to rain that night as well. So I mean, maybe talk about like ways to, if you do find yourself on the bad side of weather, like are there any tips or any like ways to set yourself up?
Yeah, absolutely. This is not a shameless plug for our products, but you do want a good game bag. Preferably an Argali game bag. But, if you're going to choose, you just want a good game bag because, first of all, like flies are a significant issue. Like last year, I think I told you guys, we didn't have it this year, but last year, the amount of flies laying eggs on the outside of my game bags was like, made you want to vomit. It was disgusting. They were not, the maggots weren't able to get through the bags, but they were certainly trying. So you want a high quality game bag. But what I've done before, Eric, is bring a tarp to set up just to keep your meat out of the rain. And then underneath that tarp, build a lattice system with alder branches. So I had a small saw and I cut a bunch of branches, like preferably the bigger, the better, and just tried to make a lattice and keep my meat on bone and then lay those quarters on that lattice system so you get airflow underneath. Yep. And so I found like a depression and then laid branches across that depression and then laid quarters on that. And then I would flip them. And it actually worked pretty well. It wasn't as good as hanging, but it was better than laying your quarters on the ground and on the grass.
Yeah, that's super interesting. That makes total sense. I mean, that's something that I always like think about early like that. It's like you're exposed to warmer temps. And I mean, when you don't have a tree to just hang it in, it's like my head was kind of spinning on that.
Yeah.
So, but that does make a lot of sense. I mean, thankfully for us, everyone's meat was in a great spot. We're all good there, but that is good to know.
Yep. Because I hauled my meat out in game bags and then in trash bags because I just threw it into the main bag of my pack for the pack out. When we got back to camp, I felt the meat and then I just opened up the game bags so they were like there was like some airflow going into them. And then because I was a little bit concerned about the rain, but I was also concerned about like I don't want to trap that much heat. But the ground was like really cold. Like it was pretty that night. It was cold. It was rainy, and I felt like it was going to cool down like optimally, but also keep the rain off. But then like what Brad was saying, I think if you can do that, that's optimal. And then do you ever carry a tarp then? You said, is that what did you mention that, Brad? Okay, that goes over the top then, kind of like a
lightweight tarp and just build it like a almost like a lean-to style.
Okay,
just however you can fashion it with trekking poles or a couple alders, but just something to try and keep the rain off of it.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep. Yeah, very cool. I was talking to a guy one time, and one thing that he mentioned that I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense, was like, he's like, if for what you're doing, like it's optimal that you kind of you want to leave the meat on the bone, but he'll like on a hind, he'll make a cut, kind of like almost like that initial cut if you were gonna bone it out, and then just fillet around that, I guess that femur bone or whatever, and then it just kind of gets some air around it and starts to cool it off around that bone where it might have a tendency to sour.
Any reason to keep it on the bone?
Cleanliness,
Yeah. Huh. That's so interesting to me.
Less surfaces exposed to air.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It takes longer for that core I'd say like if you could get that core bone cool off, it will act like an ice pack in the middle. But it will retain heat and it will retain cold. So if it's cold enough, you think, to cool it off at night, leaving it on the bone can be advantageous, because if it cools down to, say, let's say 40 degrees, it will help keep that meat cooler for longer. It's not so much an issue with blacktails, but one of the issues with boning out an animal, which I just did on an elk, is it balls up into a giant mass, and that mass, the distance from the center of that mass to the outside is more than if you had left the meat on the bone. And so, the temperature in the center there is going to be harder to cool and heat, right? And initially it can be harder to cool if you don't flip that meat around when it's deboned. So if it is deboned and it's in a big ball, you just want to make sure to kind of move it around so the warm parts get to the outside to cool off.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. While we're talking about meat, we talked about the deer themselves a little bit, but I guess also comparatively, like if you're like, oh, I'm going to hunt Alaska, remotely for the first time, these deer are smaller statured than a lot of other, I guess maybe not a lot, but then, like, I guess compared to like a moose, right? Like you get a moose down, like you've got a big animal and a lot of meat on your hands, a lot of additional meat logistics, potential for, more difficult to get out, it's just like really like elevates what you have going on there. So I'd say that is also another advantage of these deer is like, a little bit smaller statured compared to the, less to deal with. Now, I will say, though, of the Sitka blacktails that I've seen in my life, these ones on Kodiak are kind of next level. Like, they're actually big deer. Like, a mature buck is a pretty big deer.
Well, that's because we all shot big bucks.
Oh, is that what happened?
Yeah, I did. I mean, we did go to a spot that had a particularly large, I would say significant number of very mature bucks. So I don't think our experience is everybody else's, is a fairly typical experience in terms of the size of the animals. And Mark, in particular for you, I think, yeah, it must be hard to only shoot giants, and you'd be like, look at that one giant, be like, oh, this is the average size. No, Mark, you just shot a giant buck.
Yeah, are they all 260 pounds on the hoof, or is this how this works?
I've been getting a lot
Are
of
they all
phone
Boone and
calls.
Crockett?
Yeah.
Yeah, they all Boone and Crockett.
Yeah.
Does everybody else shoot Boone
Yeah.
and Crockett?
Yeah, is this good? Is it?
Is it?
Oh, so you guys could fit your hands around the base. Oh no, not even close.
It was quite honestly, it was quite cumbersome.
Yeah.
No, dude, super fortunate, and
Tune into the hunt to see it.
Tune into the hunt, which we did video document, so that'll be for your viewing pleasure. It was a cool hunt. It was a cool hunt. Check it out. And I will say, Brad, so I've shot in my life 3 Sitka blacktails. 2 of them were 2 points. So this was pretty incredible, honestly. And I'll caveat that, like you were talking about, like, oh, if you're like trying to, like, if your goal is like, oh, if your reason for going on that trip is like, I want to shoot a big buck.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's like everybody's like, oh, it's about the experience. Dude, this hunt is about the experience. And if you go on a hunt like this and do all these things and do all this planning and hike in and deal with the weather, number one, if you get home safe, you won and you had an incredible experience. If you kill a deer and do those things, off the charts. Like, honestly, for me, like, the size of the deer, although, like, super stoked, it's amazing, like, what an incredible animal. And Sawyer, honestly, everybody's deer were absolutely, like, we're super fortunate. But at least for me, like, it was kind of arbitrary at the same time.
You know what's interesting? Like, I have a lot of friends that don't hunt or are, like, curious about it. You know the thing I've talked about the least after this trip?
Yep.
The deer.
Yep.
Yeah.
I would say it's been 5% of the conversation.
Sure.
Yep.
It's not because they're not interested in it, but it didn't rise to the level of all of the cool things and crazy things that happened to where I, like, lead with it. Like, oh, check out these deer. Like, no, that was almost like an ancillary part.
Right.
I mean, yeah, you can look at those antlers and, like, yes, like, getting that deer is part of that memory that floods back, but it's just like this just overwhelming volume of some of the cool stuff I've ever experienced.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what we were talking about. Like, we've, been keeping the text string going just, between the three of us, like here and there, just like, toss a picture in, whatever. And it's like, that's been the craziest part is like every night just going through pictures and whatnot. Like the other day I sent Mark and Sawyer a video of, us in the tent after we got those deer back and like tents blowing, like it's like, that's the stuff when you're sitting there, falling asleep at night, that's the stuff you're thinking about. You're not really sitting there thinking about the deer, and I think that's what's pretty cool about it.
Mm-hmm.
I'll never forget Sawyer and I snuggled spooning in a tent, and the wind was just whipping. So Sawyer and I couldn't sleep. Jason, who's not with us right now, was fast asleep.
He's alive. He's just not on. He's not on the podcast.
Spoiler: you got to watch the video to find out what happened to Jason.
It did get wild. Yes.
Rest in peace, Jason.
Yeah.
Just like listening to the rain and the wind just pound our tent for hour after hour in the dark, and wondering, I wonder when Mark and Erik are going to get back. And I don't know how late it was that you got back, but at one point in time, one of our tents almost ripped out of the ground because of the wind. And so we went outside to stake it out, and we saw your headlamps off in the distance. And I was just like, it was just this kind of epic moment of rain that was just being driven in my eyeballs, and then seeing these headlamps just in the dark. It was pitch black, and you just see these headlamps, and I'm like, okay, they're okay. Yeah. I knew you guys would be fine, but also knew it was just miserable out. You were just in the thick of it for a long, long time in the dark.
It was a little bit snarly, and I will say, Brad, spotting the light from your tent was
oh man,
equally we had a good idea where it was, but when that thing lit up, it was just like, oh.
It's so funny hearing that from your angle, Brad, because like we have the same thing from like obviously the opposite point of view. And like we were talking about that, like the moment that we saw the tent light up, when you guys must have woke up and like, got out of the tent, obviously turned on your light, and then the whole tent was just illuminated. And I can just like, I can see it right now, like just this illuminated tent in the distance. And it was like, that's our beacon. We just got to get to that. And then like, it's all okay. It's all okay from there.
Yeah. It was, a glowing beacon of just like positivity. And it was also what's the word I'm looking for, it was it made me feel quite good to know at least one of the tents was still standing,
right? Because
you think like I've had buddies that had tents blow away, one guy they blew away in the middle of the night,
Crazy.
So all the tents, another plug for Argali. All the tents were still there. It's fantastic.
That is actually a good like kind of segue into some of the, like, I know you wanted to talk like gear and stuff like that, but I mean there's so much to like, having done it now for the first time. There's the way that I view that hunt is totally different than I had it in my head from like a gear standpoint and what I thought I needed versus what I actually needed.
I'd really be curious. Like, I definitely want to talk to Brad. I know that I've got some strong thoughts there, but I'd love to hear like some of your thoughts, like before and after, like what you thought, like you needed before, like exactly what you're just saying.
Yeah. I mean, and that's exactly kind of where I was going. It was like, I own rain gear. It's something that I use 10% of the time, and I hunt a lot. But it's one of those things where I've never actually like invested in a good rain gear or anything like that. So that was the biggest thing for me. I mean, we'll get into this, but like we literally did not wear anything other than rain gear for the vast majority of the hunting. I actually didn't even bring anything other than rain gear up. So, because
I wore it when it was nice out. Because you knew it was going to start raining. It was a matter of when. So it's just like, do I want to fiddle around and change pants?
You're not going to.
I'm just going to put it on.
Yeah. So in my head, I kept like thinking like, all I need is like just this like ultralight minimalist rain shell to pop on my body when it's when we're getting a 10-minute pop-up shower, something like that. No, that was not the case.
It's a 10-hour pop-up shower.
Yeah.
No, we were living in our rain gear. I mean, to the point where actually, the temps were like moderate. Like I just wore my rain gear over my merino boxers and my socks. Like I didn't like I initially had planned. I'm like, oh, I'll probably wear like my lighter weight pants under my rain gear, take it on and off, and then it just was like very clear, like you said. So you're like, even if it's not raining, it's about to, or the ground's going to be wet. And you need to sit down. So you just end up living in it. And I knew that, but.
Yeah. Some other, like, I mean, obviously from like a sleep standpoint, like good sleeping bag, like that was obviously a consideration, but I always kind of like err on the side of like creature comfort. So like we were talking about this, Mark, like you brought up like extra clothes and stuff like that, whereas I left extra clothes out of my pack for the hike up to our spike camp, and instead I brought with like an ultralight cot. Mm-hmm. And I also brought up the ultralight little like chair, like the little like pop out chair. Two things on that. One, the cot, as soon as we got up there, like it was like that tundra type stuff. Nothing's flat, so there was no way to get the cot like assembled without, as soon as you put weight on it, falling down. The other thing was the chair. As soon as we walked all the way up there, I brought that chair. I'm like, I'm throwing this thing in. It's only an extra pound, whatever. As soon as I set that thing up, I put it down and sat on it, and all of the legs went all the way buried up to the base and into the tundra, and I'm just sitting there on the ground. So that thing never saw the light of day again.
I mean that's interesting but you love that cotton and it's worked for you.
That cot works really awesome in every other sleeping application for a teepee style tent. I love those little the brand is actually called Desert Walker. They're like $90 compared to some of the other like more expensive options out there, and they're just a little cot that'll get you 2.5 inches off the ground. They break down about the size of a spotting scope and don't weigh a heck of a lot more than probably about what a spotter weighs, honestly. So,
but it was funny. Like you're like, I'm bringing this. Like I could tell. Like that was like a non-negotiable for you. And like in 10 million years, like the cot wouldn't have crossed my mind. I'm like, I'll bring an extra puffy jacket. Yeah. I'll bring an extra. I brought my regular lightweight pants. I think that was more out of like optimism that like maybe it wouldn't rain.
Yep.
Which was not the case. But Brad, I mean, like to show contrast, you've done that hunt a couple other times, and you had like superb weather.
Yeah, I mean, I have brought the heavy rain gear the last 2 times and have never used it. Just pack it around all the time. So it's just, you just never know what it's going to be like. But I think it's really interesting. It's really interesting for me to hear you guys talk about gear. We didn't mention that we backpacked in, right? So we got dropped off on a beach and then we backpacked in. So there's an extra, for us, there was an extra gear packing component for this trip. There's a reason we backpacked in. I promised, for all you listening, like I promised these guys that we would see nice deer if we backpacked into this one area. I hope it didn't disappoint, fellas, but it also added a lot of logistic complexity to it because, for example, when we had to just plow through some awful brushy ground to get to where we wanted to go, and it actually took us 2 attempts, right? We set out in the pouring rain to get to the top to get out of the brush and up high out of the alders, and failed. We went up a route sweating and going through whatever, didn't work, came back down, next day found another route. But you really have to pick and choose what you take. And I do enough like backpack hunting that I've really got my stuff kind of dialed, and I kind of tweak it based on where I'm going. But I don't like carrying a lot of weight. I really don't. I hate the weight on my back. And so I tend to underpack. And so I would never in my life think of bringing a cot, Eric.
Yep.
But there are so many times where I'm like, if I'm only going, we didn't backpack that far. So it wasn't that big of a deal. And, a chair is not a horrible idea either. But yeah, you don't think about the things like, the ground is going to be this mossy, porous stuff that as soon as you sit on it, your chair is just going to like sink to the ground, sink all the way in and become kind of useless. You don't think about that stuff. But I didn't pack. The other thing I underpacked for was food. I have a fairly dialed like food system, but I think we were burning so many calories because it was so wet and miserable. As I told all you guys, I was starving for the first few days and just didn't pack enough food and started cannibalizing my reserves because I was so hungry.
Brad,
so I was on the opposite side of the spectrum.
I wish you would have told me that, because like I have like this weird phobia of not having enough food, so then I always overpack food and then somehow still decide that I need to ration my food.
Yep.
So like literally it would have been the food version of like having Dumb and Dumber having extra gloves in the Rockies. So I wish you would have just come over, because
Mark's got Costco in his backpack.
Yeah.
I'm over here.
Yeah.
So
begging for soup on the street. Yeah.
In the future, come on over. There's plenty of food.
Okay.
Gosh, I was thinking of something. So maybe somebody fill in the time while I think of what I was thinking of there.
I would just say that let me just talk about gear for a second.
Yeah, please.
We spent a lot of time collectively talking about gear, and I spent a lot of time talking to you guys about gear, gave you kind of like, we talked about like spreadsheets. I do think it's really helpful to plan out your gear to a T, have a list of things and that you want to pack. And then also, as you're trying to figure out your gear, there are a lot of opinions out there on what you should and shouldn't take. Figure out what works for you. And also, I mentioned this to you guys, that like, make sure you can fit all your gear in like a duffel bag before you travel, like well before you need to get on an airplane. Try and fit all that stuff in a bag, because I've heard of guys taking things like, full hip boots plus, a couple pairs of boots, and that's just a lot of gear. So you have to make decisions about what you're willing to leave and what's really important. And ultimately, a lot of that comes down to what you want, what you're going to be comfortable with. There's the old saying that we pack our insecurities. Think about that really long and hard about what you really need. Like, are you really going to need 10 pairs of socks, or can you get by with 4 or 5, And you guys might be shocked to hear this, but I actually didn't bring a backup pair of underwear when we went backpacking. So there you go. Unnecessary weight. So do you really need it? Probably, but can you get away with just the one? They were a good pair of underwear. They were Patagonia boxers, so I had confidence they would be fine.
Hey, we're in the trust tree here, and up the hill.
We're not recording this, are we?
Oh, Brad. No, we're not. We're not. Yeah, you're fine. This is just some casual conversation amongst friends. But I agree. Like, I think I brought 2 pairs of socks up. I did bring 2 pairs of underwear and an extra puffy jacket. But like, I have also on that island, or I'd say particularly like Alaska, Southeast Alaska, like I've got also a phobia of like getting too wet and then not being able to dry out, which actually kind of happened to us.
Did happen. When we got back that night after packing out those deer, I again brought more on the creature comfort side of things, like cot and chair, and packed less and a lot of food and less on the side of like redundant clothes and stuff like that. So literally the clothes that I had on my back plus the puffy jacket plus the rain shell, which were both in my backpack, were the only things that I had. And coming off out of the field that day, every single thing from like shell to skin was sopping wet. And that's not like any discredit to the rain gear. The rain gear did phenomenal. Part of it too is sweating
from
so
the
you're
inside
sweating
out.
from the inside out. And got back to the tent.
Well, I was even getting rain. Like, I didn't have my just because of like
zipped up,
it wasn't so like, and that rain was like blowing so crazy. Like, it was just like coming in from the top too.
Yeah, but when we got back, I was warm because I still had my merino shirt on and merino boxers, and that that was something that like I had always known that merino retains heat when wet, but I had never actually been like faced with a situation like that. So you and I were talking that night in the tent, and we're like, I'm soaking wet, like literally could wring out my undergarments with sweat and moisture from the sky, and ended up got that off, and as soon as I got things off, I was freezing, and that's where your extra puffy actually came into play, because mine was soaked. It was in the top load of my backpack, got some water in there, and it was really wet, so that actually helped out a ton, having that.
Yep, that was the Dumb and Dumber moment of the trip.
Yeah.
Try this. I'm getting
Yeah,
pretty
here,
sweaty.
take this.
But Brad, and you brought up something that actually I think is, and I guess I'll just reiterate, like packing your stuff before you go and getting that really, really dialed. Because like I think I packed and repacked my backpack like 10 times over the course of like 2 weeks, just like, and some of that was like, oh, like I'd remember like, oh, I do want to take this. Okay, well, how does that fit in? And you have a finite amount of space in that backpack, and it can be like, just like it's like backpack Jenga, trying to get everything to fit in. You trying to get, well, I want all my lightweight stuff at the bottom. Okay, well, here's my food. That's pretty heavy. I'm trying to fit that there, but now I've got all these bags of food. So how do I fit my other gear around that?
The other thing to remember is, at least for me, it's never going to be packed again as well as it is in your basement. Like, that is the other thing you need to remember. Whether you're caught in rain, whether you're super tired, like the plane's coming, you're getting out of there, like, it is never going to be as perfect as you have it in your basement.
Yep.
The sleeping bag isn't going to be packed the same way. Like, you're not going to roll your clothes the same way. Food's going to be different. Like, that was the other thing I tried to remember. So I put it in, like, 4 different ways. Like, one super neat, one, like, just chuck it in there and see if it'll fit. And that helped me quite a bit.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and just familiarizing yourself with your backpack, too. Like, I mean, I was viewing my backpack as, like, you always hear stories of, folks that are issued a service rifle, how they have to be able to service that thing blindfolded. That's how I was thinking about my backpack. And, I did kind of the same thing. Like, I kept packing it up, tear it down, pack it up, tear it down, to where I was just super familiar with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's, and that even just that gear familiarity is like, on the mountain shouldn't be the first time you're using something. And I feel like anytime I go on a hunt, like there's like that one piece of gear that I do that with.
Yep.
So like I totally, in my opinion, rolled the dice. I got it. Like I really like my sleep mat that I have right now, but then there was a shiny new sleep mat. And then I pulled it out of the package and it was just like rolled up so nice and tight that I didn't want to like unroll it because I liked how much space it was taking up. And then we got to camp. I'm like, it came with this thing, like this bag to blow it up, and I'm fiddling with that and I plug it in. It's not working. I'm like, oh my gosh, dude. Like, I'm not going to be able to inflate my air mattress for this trip. And then I'm like, okay, F the whatever thing that it came with. I'm going to pull it out. And then it felt like it was stuck. I'm like, great. Now I'm not only, like, now I'm going to break my air mattress before we even start. And anyway, I got it out, blew it up the old-fashioned way. We were good to go. And now that's my new favorite air mattress.
Yep.
But anyway, just another, I guess, an example of what not to do.
Exactly. Yep.
I don't know, Brad, do you have any other thoughts there?
No, just I think thinking about the gear is part of the fun of going on a trip like this. And I guess I own a gear company because I enjoy thinking about gear a lot, but I also think it is a common thread when you go on an adventure hunt is to think about the gear, and it gives you, I get a lot of enjoyment out of it, and I'm at peace with saying that. It's like, and I feel like we were all on the same page, that is dealing with the gear, thinking about the gear, buying and selling stuff leading up to the trip. Like I feel like that is something that is fun for going on a trip like this. And I think anybody that wants to do a trip like this should feel okay getting some enjoyment out of thinking about the gear, preparing for a trip like this.
And we talked about this quite a bit. Like, you're biting off a lot going to Alaska, but if you dial it in and get the gear you need for this hunt, like,
you're set.
Like, it is pretty smooth sailing.
Unless you're going to Mongolia or something, like, you're probably pretty well set for the rest of your hunting career.
Wisconsin turkeys don't stand a chance
No,
anymore.
No, it's over now.
Yeah.
Like, it's...
Honestly, I feel bad for them. Well, and I'd say also, don't feel bad, like, splurging. Like, you can get by on a lot of hunts with, like, okay gear, okay tent, okay backpack.
This ain't it.
Okay apparel. Like, this isn't it. Like,
No.
this hunt is what, in my opinion, premium gear is built for. And it's also, in my opinion, it's essential because, like, and I don't feel like I'm being dramatic. Like, it will say, like, your life is at stake. Like, you're going into, like, a pretty, like hostile environment in some ways. And, like, and I'm not trying to be dramatic, but the weather is actually what I worry about the most in Alaska in general, and particularly Kodiak. Like, You get too wet too long, like that's a problem. You can't. So anyway, I just spend the money on the good gear. Like you'll be glad you did. That's not an extra on this type of hunt. Get some good gear. Plus, I love gear. Gear is fun. It is.
You do love it.
And Brad, you helped me a ton with that Google sheet, but I really enjoyed that part of the process. I thought that was super fun, honestly.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't get down to, like, the gram counting side of it, but it was fun putting that spreadsheet together. And it definitely mentally helped me get me in a good place. Like, all right, you got the column for acquired, you got the column for packed. Like, mentally, that for me was like the switch going on. Like, yeah, okay, you're good. Like, I'm not worried about forgetting something, or you get there, you're like, I forgot 3 days of food. Like, oops.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't happen, which help, especially on a trip like this where the mental side of it is, like, critical. Yeah. Like, you got to have your stuff buttoned up so you can be kind of firing on all cylinders once you're actually in there. Like, it's very important.
Well, when we're talking about bringing stuff, like, up and down, and, like, what you're willing to take, what you're willing to leave. On our first ascent, Brad, I had a bear fence in my backpack, which actually is like, I wouldn't say it's a thing not to bring, right? In fact, at our camp, kind of like our base camp, gear camp, where we had a few, kind of essentials stashed, we had a bear fence around that, which I think is a very smart thing to do, because I don't know, it seems like bears can be curious, or they want to break stuff or whatever. You got some extra food down there, like they'll get into it, and then that's a problem. But on our first ascent, I had one with us to put around us when we were at the top. I think you had one too, Eric. Somebody else had one, I think. On our second ascent, the next day, that was not in my backpack. That 3 pounds stayed at the bottom.
Yeah. Yep.
I was like, bears. We'll see what happens.
Probably be fine.
Yeah. Roll the dice.
I think, too, like, we did see some bears up there. One you saw, Brad, so maybe you can talk about. I actually wasn't expecting to see any bears up there just because of the quantity of fish that was down low. Like, I was like, and mentally for me, I was like, dude, once we get up a little bit, we're going to be out of the bear zone. They've got no reason to be up where we're at, which was kind of surprising because it wasn't necessarily the case. We saw one just across the valley from us, luckily going the other way. We saw a bunch. Well, we saw a bunch while we were down low at the beach. Yeah. And then
we saw more from up top. Anytime you would just glass down towards that other section of beach, you would see bears in that too.
But generally, like, down low, like I said, there was that one. Yep. But then, Brad, you guys were in camp, and you had, I'd say, like, a fairly close encounter, which when you said that, I was like, really? What the heck was he doing up here?
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I've been to Kodiak. I haven't ever seen a bear up high. When I say high, like, Kodiak has, I would say, like, lower elevation lands with, especially when there are salmon running, most of the bears tend to congregate down there, but there's also berries everywhere. And so, bears can get food wherever, but typically when there's fish, you expect to see the bears down close to where the fish are running because it's just a higher calorie source. But yeah, one day we were out up high on a completely open, ridge with maybe, 1/2-inch grass and rock. And there was a real large boar that we saw right on top of that ridge. And it wasn't, he didn't get super close, but he got close enough. He got, just inside probably 200 yards, 180 yards from us. He was walking at us. And the first time I kind of waved my arms and yelled at him, he just stared at me with eyes like, I don't care. And that made me a little nervous. And then he kept coming at us.
So that's when I started crying. And then...
No, I just pulled out the pistol. I was like, well, we're going to dance, I guess. And then he came a little closer, and then I was able to wave him off again. So then I really started, moving a little faster and getting a little louder, and he didn't like that and ran off. But I think the point is, though, I have been maybe a little too comfortable with the idea that you don't see bears up high when, they could, I know they could be everywhere. On the island, and just in general, when you're in bear country, you can run into a bear anywhere, and you kind of need to be prepared for that. most of the time though, those bears they don't want to deal with you, but you just never know, man. I mean, I've certainly have friends who've had bear encounters that shouldn't have happened in terms of, the bear saw them and ran at them. You just never know. And that's just part of hunting in a place that has lots of bears, is you're just you got to accept the fact that you're living in bear country and just be smart about it. I don't think you have to let it just overtake, like the fear overtake you. And I think hopefully you guys got appreciation for that. I know there was some concern about safety and bears, and I felt responsible for everybody. Just so you guys know, I felt a great degree of responsibility. Like if something were to happen to somebody, I felt like that was on me. But I hope you guys got a feel for the fact that yes, we were definitely in bears like all around us, but we didn't have any bears charge us or try and get into our meat. Or even shockingly into our low camp tent, which I thought for sure a bear would come down there and plow through our tents down there. But
yeah, I was surprised by that as well. Like we saw bears down there on several occasions from up high in close proximity to that camp. And like when we went down there, that was when we came around the corner and the tents were still just standing there. I was like, holy cow, that is the most refreshing thing I ever could have imagined.
It felt good.
Yeah.
Feels good, man.
It does feel good. I mean, yeah. I mean, you just again, it's kind of a little bit of a cost of doing business if you want to go do that trip. Like that is a raw and real reality. And like you said, Brad, like if you want to do that trip, you can't let it consume you the whole time, because you just kind of need to accept it and but also be prepared for it too. Like, I mean,
right.
I feel like everybody did a good job of both those things. It's like, okay, so we'll put a bear fence around our base camp. Everybody's going to have bear spray. Most people had a pistol. If you didn't have a pistol, you had a firearm. What else are you going to do?
Right, exactly.
Outside of that, if you're worried about bears beyond that, then you probably just don't go, which is fine. Like, I mean, there's that's a legitimate thing to, be concerned about. But yeah, no, that was, it's one of the very cool things of that place, and also one of the real kind of scary things of that place.
Right.
I mean, I feel like that's Alaska in general for me. Like it's the coolest place on the planet, and it also scares me a little bit too. It's like that's kind of where you're going, and this hunt for me, 100% tested me in a lot of different ways, and I'm totally a better person and a better hunter for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about, Brad, maybe describe a little bit, so the terrain, I don't know how many hours that I spent looking at aerials, on this trip, but maybe the discrepancy in what it looks like on an aerial versus when you get there.
There's really no way you can tell. Well, I shouldn't say no way. I would say it's very, very difficult to look at an aerial photograph, or hell, even from an airplane, what it's going to be like to walk in that country versus what it looks like when you're above it in the air. Because what you can't see and what you guys experienced is the density and the height of the brush and the grass and the ferns and the thorns and everything else in there. I mean, you can have raspberry bushes. You can look at a hillside and be like, oh, that's just some knee-high grass or ferns over there. Well, in reality, that could be raspberry bushes that are 6 feet tall. It's very deceptive. And you learn, I'm sure you guys did, that you can pick the color of the shade of green that you look at can oftentimes tell you how tall the vegetation is, because there are no trees other than alder. I don't know what an alder is. I'm not an arborist, fellas, or a botanist. Whatever an alder fits into,
or a pilot.
I think the alders fall into the tangled mess category.
Yeah,
tangled mess. Yeah, there. Yeah. So you have alders, and sometimes you get some cottonwoods down in river bottoms, but for the most part, it's brush, and it's just very deceiving. We were basically from down low, which we did an ocean landing, which a lot of people don't do because it's so miserable, and then hiked out of the brush
Very
and the
accurate.
alders. It is true. Like most people will not do that, but I think you guys will hopefully agree, we were rewarded with the hunting that we had.
Oh,
Yep, absolutely.
Most people, for understandable reasons, like to do a fly in and land at a lake and then camp on a lake and then hunt from the lake, day hunt from the lake. I've done that. It's a very enjoyable experience. But you guys really got the full meal deal experience. But anyways, I just say the vegetation is deceivingly thick and difficult to get through. There was last year, I remember a 1/4 mile stretch. I'm not making this up or exaggerating. There was a 1/4 mile of vegetation that I had to go get to a deer that I was watching it bedded down. I was trying to sneak in and shoot it with the bow. I had to go down a simple drainage, and it was mostly open with a little bit of alder. It took me an hour to get a 1/4 mile. It was so miserable to get, and I did not anticipate it would take me that long, but sometimes that's just what it takes. And that was all, anyway, it's a long story, but the vegetation is unpredictable and deceiving and can be shockingly difficult to get to until you get out of the brush and get to the alpine. And then you can just cruise up and down ridges and it's a lot easier.
Yeah.
Would you guys agree with that?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I would agree with that 100%. And the one thing, like when we'd be here at work or, whatever at Sawyer's house and like looking at aerials and things like that. I think, and this was even more during probably like, oh, maybe we'll go here, conversing with you on like, when we're trying to pick where we're going to go. But like the one thing I was like saying is like, all right, guys, we need to remember that these contour lines are 100-foot contour lines because I don't know what, or I guess maybe because there just wouldn't be contour lines necessarily, but like when on our, digital mapping here locally, like it automatically transitions to 20-foot contour lines. And so like, and even so, like looking at them, I was like, oh yeah, like, okay, that looks like a good route. Actually, I think we ended up going up. The route that we took was the route that we initially planned on taking when we thought we were going to land at the far back end of the bay. Then we ended up landing up towards a little bit more towards the front of the bay. So we ended up picking a different route up, which actually seemed fine until you got to that point where like, oh, well, you can't pass that necessarily, or at least, not without a significant amount of risk. But the steepness was still like kind of like jaw dropping to me. When we landed there, like I was like, I don't know if there's a way up.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Like, did that not cross your mind? Because it crossed my mind.
Nothing could prepare me for that vert. Like, I remember, again, looking at mapping and be like, you measure out what you think's going to be a reasonable way up there. You're like 900 yards, like 9 football fields. Totally doable, right? Like, I can do that. It's going to suck, but not that far. You get to the base of that, and it is like, oh my God. Like, you're not zigzagging up that, like, finding benches. Like, it is literally straight vert. Like, crawling your way up. It's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's just you're tunneling through the raspberry bushes and stuff. Like I couldn't ever determine if it was easier for the first guy or harder for the last guy, because the last guy going all the way up, like you have a path now from like everybody that's gone.
It's all mud,
but it's all mud.
It's mud.
Just sheer mud. Like that was actually back to gear. Like one thing, there is no way I would ever consider doing it without trekking poles. Trekking poles were a
I don't think
lifesaver.
you can. I don't like.
I mean, trekking poles, in my opinion, even though I think I'm the only one that strapped them on, micro spikes are like a must for me. We'll go into the trekking poles, micro spikes, gaiters,
rain gear,
high quality rain gear, high quality shelter, high quality backpack.
And a level of insanity
bag,
in your brain.
A level of insanity and a thirst for adventure.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
You forgot game bags, Mark.
And game bags. Yep.
High quality game bags. Nope. That is true. I mean, that's so true though. Like, you do not want some junky game bag that's gonna fall apart. That's gonna that is not. It's just
non-negotiable.
Yeah, it's just not on the table.
It's a trip you have to commit to. Get the best stuff.
Yeah.
Get the best stuff.
Like, money at that point becomes no option. You're already committed to the trip. Yeah. I think to Brad's earlier point, you're doing it.
Right.
Like, if you're going to have to pinch pennies for a couple months after because you got a little nicer stuff, like to me, it's better than being absolutely miserable and ruining the trip.
It's like going skydiving. Like, you jump and then you're doing it.
Yeah. Yep.
So you can't stop falling.
Except
Accurate description.
Except
of
there's
skydiving.
There's probably more risk of death on this trip, though. No, I like it. We covered a lot of things.
Last thing we should probably talk about is meat logistics back home.
Oof.
That was something that, like, on the front end, I was most confused about. I'm like, how in the heck are we going to get this stuff home? You know? And I'm like, how did we do that?
I mean,
there was a trip to Milwaukee.
The trip itself is so amazing.
Yeah.
But which is, and then part of the fun, I mean, there is a high level of work on the front end. And then there's also like a high level of work on the back end to kind of like make sure you get all the stuff home cold, froze.
Yeah. So maybe talk about that a little bit. Like, we got back, we got Willie to transport the meat back. From there, we got it frozen at the hotel that we were at.
So,
all those hotels there.
Even before that, this goes back to Brad's about a pilot you can trust. He put it in his personal chest freezer at his home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a huge plus.
Yeah.
Yeah, because he flew out, he made the meat run, came out, took it back, and I mean, like, that's just like a solid move.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's that was really cool, super helpful.
From there, it goes to the hotel that we stayed at. They have a freezer.
Mm-hmm.
Then we ship it. And maybe, like, that's where I think people need a little bit of context as to, like, different ways of shipping meat.
So my initial thought in my head would have been to get some waxed fish boxes from in town, which generally hold about 50 pounds of, fish or meat, tape them up, throw them in the belly of the plane as extra baggage, and then with having it froze solid, just kind of like crossing your fingers, knowing like, hey, it's probably going to thaw, but not completely by the time I get home. And that'll be, we'll be all right. Right. And I think some people, correct me if I'm wrong, Brad, but if you go that route, sometimes people put dry ice in their box too, or not?
I believe people do. I've never done that.
I
think you can.
Okay.
But yeah.
I haven't either. We went a little bit different route because of maybe you explain how we ended up shipping it.
Yeah, the way I like to do it is I think 99% of people use what are called waxed fish boxes, which are literally designed to ship frozen fish from, but you can also ship meat in them and maybe line them with a contractor trash bag. I have done that and I don't like doing that. I've told you guys all this, but I don't like doing that. I much prefer, if I can, to go to like a Walmart or a Home Depot, if there is one, and buy the plastic totes, either the black with the yellow tops or whatever they have, and put my meat in those, just because they carry better, they don't leak. And the airlines really don't like it when you have blood leaking out of a box. In fact, they won't take your box if you do have that. And Mark, you and I had to deal with a little bit of that. We couldn't find there. Kodiak was completely out of totes that we could use to ship meat, and the ones they did have were outrageously expensive. So we ended up using the wax fish boxes. You really have two options when you're shipping meat. You can ship it as carry-on baggage with your airline, so you can go to the airline when you go to check in, and you just have your extra boxes with you. And you pay typically $100 a box, just like you would for luggage after your 2 pieces of luggage. So if you have your rifle case and a duffel bag full of all your clothes and gear, those are your 2 pieces of luggage. And then anything over that, let's say you have 2 boxes full of deer meat, or 1 box full of deer meat, and then 1 box for antlers, that's $200 you're going to spend on luggage. We actually shipped air cargo. So every airline has an air cargo program that anybody can sign up to have an air cargo account. So you don't have to be a business. You don't even have to be somebody that ships things. If you want to sign up for an Alaska Airlines air cargo account, you can go on their website, Alaska Air Cargo website, create an account. You have some paperwork you have to fill out, but you can create an account and then you can ship air cargo. The nice thing about that is, and which we did, is you can take your game meat and freeze it and then take it down to air cargo whenever you want, before your flight, after your flight, doesn't matter, and ship your meat to any airport where Alaska Airlines goes to. So I ship my meat back home to Boise. Unfortunately for you guys, Alaska Airlines doesn't fly to Madison, so you had to ship it to Milwaukee. But it was nice because 2-3 days we got back and we had some extra time, froze our meat, put it in boxes, and 2 or 3 days before we were going to fly home, we shipped all our meat out. So then we didn't have to deal with it anymore for the rest of the trip, which is really, I think, pretty handy. And it's also typically a lot more cost-effective way to ship bulk goods.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, I mean, kind of the level of it kind of took a weight off our shoulders at that point. You're not like, okay, now let's, while you're trying to go to the airport and you've got all your other gear along with your meat, like it kind of takes like just one thing and it's taken care of before you even hop on the jet. So that was, super cool. I will say, like, it can be a little bit tricky. Like Milwaukee doesn't have a freezer or refrigeration, so like I really had to, which it worked out fine. Like it worked out perfectly, but I just had to stay on the ball, call, see where it was. It ended up spending an extra day in Anchorage, but it was in a freezer, so it was fine. And then just like make sure, like, okay, cool, all the flights are, everything's moving forward. And then I just, drove the, 2 hours, met the meat there, drove it back, got it, we got it processed, and off we went. So, yeah, I thought that worked out really, really well overall, for sure. And I feel like that's kind of like a hot tip, because then, I don't know, it's just nice to know that, like, really like at the end of the day, like, you're not worried about the meat, which is kind of what you were trying to come home with, along with all the memories. But,
yep, for sure.
Like, you would just hate to have that not go right at the very end.
Yep, exactly.
And not that it would go wrong if you did it the other way, but it was just nice to have it
exactly.
done. Yeah, man. I don't know. Trip of a lifetime.
Absolutely.
No doubt.
It was off the charts. So, yeah, thank you, Brad, for helping us and going on it with us. Like, I seriously, I can't imagine a better trip. So it was amazing.
Dream team and a dream hunt, fellas.
Yeah,
that was fun. I had a good time.
Literally as good as it gets.
Yeah, Brad, to your earlier comment about knowing and trusting who you're going with, I think the mix of personalities and people on this was like, I don't know if it can get any better. Yeah. Like, there wasn't any weird, awkward stuff happening. Like, everyone was positive. Like, everyone was down for whatever we were going to do. Like, it was just like everyone was just firing, man. Like, it was perfect in my book.
Yeah, we talked about that a bunch, like, and especially like anytime you're filming something, you have that extra element, an extra kind of layer woven into it. And, I know we're going to get another one of these on the books to kind of like get the video guys' point of view on things, which that'll be a separate podcast, kind of like more hyper-focused story time type thing. But, that's where those guys really shine too, is it's one thing to do all this stuff, but when you start filming it, it's another beast. And those guys never complained a single time, and I think that is literally the difference between the trip of a lifetime or a disaster.
I mean, Coop and Mike were down for the cause.
Absolutely. Yep.
I mean, and Jason too. Like,
and
it was
Jason,
just
we
like,
keep forgetting just because he's not here, but
he's dead.
He's alive, very much alive, just not here. Yeah, on the podcast.
I think that's worth noting too. Just the people that you go with are so important to whether or not you have fun and enjoy the trip.
Yeah.
True story. I met a guy last year, not in Alaska, but on another bush flight in an unnamed state, where I was flown into an airstrip with a couple buddies, and we were landing on the airstrip. It was very similar. We got dropped off and we backpacked out. We met a guy at that airstrip who had come in with a buddy, never been in here. It was a big deal for him, a big adventure. His buddy was just overwhelmed with the situation and being dropped off in the middle of nowhere with no way to communicate with anybody. that he ended up bailing on the trip 2 days in. Left this guy. I mean, they had put lots of money and time and effort, and this poor guy, was just lonely and trying to make the best of a really bad situation. So who you go with is just so important. And in so many situations, you know, when some people, when you get into, it gets miserable and wet and cold, like we were. Some people, not everybody, but some people, their first response is, get me out of here. I need to get out of here. I'm over this. Like, I want to leave. And that'll ruin your trip. It'll ruin your trip, even if you don't have that mentality. And everybody on this trip had the right attitude of, we're in it to win it. We're here for the fun and the experience. The rain and the wind and the cold and just the sopping wet boots for days on end sucked, but we're just going to deal with it and put a smile on our face and get out of our tents in the morning and eat some breakfast and go hunt, you know, or whatever. Like, that is just such an important part of having a good experience.
Yeah. I mean, I'll double down on that too, because I think that's one thing, like, you know, you do a hunt by yourself, like a solo type hunt. You set yourself up for like it's a totally different thing, you know, and you're probably a little bit more focused on shooting like a really big something, you know, like I'm speaking from like a whitetail hunter's perspective. Like, a lot of the almost all the whitetail hunting I do is by myself. And, you know, your goal is a little bit different than something like this. But when you get a group together, whether it's this or some of the other stuff, like, you know, we've talked about some of these wall tent camps and stuff like that, like, it is such a totally different dynamic. And that is those are the memories I think that you just kind of hang on to, and they never leave you. Like, it's just the coolest part about it.
Well, and what's funny for me, Brad, going back to like what you said, like before this trip, I was like, oh man, like, I hope we get good weather. Like, we're going in August, like, I mean, and you just like, you think like, oh, we're going in August. Of course you can have bluebird weather. Like, the times that I've gone in August, we did not have bluebird. Like, I've never gone and had like the trips. I'm acting like I've done this a lot of times. I haven't, but I'm just saying, like, I pretty much plan on being in my rain gear the whole time. So I was like, oh, I hope we have good weather. And then, like, you know, we kind of shifted our plans midstream, like prior to the hunt, but we're like, okay, we're going to go in from the ocean instead of going in from a lake. I was like, oh man, from the ocean, you know, because like, like, you just like, that's what I did before. I'm like, that can be pretty gnarly. But now looking back, I'm like, and part of it is probably the outcome, because like, I mean, you know, like, everybody shot just like bomber blacktails. Like, how could it have worked out better? It couldn't have worked out better. So I won't say that isn't weighing in on my perception of the overall hunt, but like, I'm like, oh man, I'm glad we hiked in from the ocean. I'm glad we had variable weather. Like we said before, because it really did test me, and I feel like I'm just like a lot better for it. So,
absolutely.
And it made it more
we'll never forget
a little more interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We all learned a lot about each other. I learned about Marky Bear.
Marky Bear.
I didn't know there's any more layers to peel back with Marky Bear, but I think we all had some growing up to do in the end, as the old adage says.
Maybe I talked to myself a little bit, okay? maybe I talked to myself in the third person as Marky Bear.
Marky Bear, yeah. We're going to need to get like a meme or something. Ryan, we can talk. I've got ideas.
For those, we probably should go, like, all that happened was I was in the gear tent, and I was like kind of like organizing things, and like, this goes here, and I should put that over there, and maybe I got somewhat frustrated and I said, oh, Marky Bear. Maybe I said something like that. That's the story.
Allegedly.
You guys might remember it differently, but
I cannot confirm nor deny.
That's the stuff I remember, though. I don't remember the wet boots.
No, all that's gone. So yeah, it was. I don't know. Keep talking about it. Like, you can't stop talking about it, because it's like it's just so grand. Like, the entire place is so grand. Like, it's like information overload, like sensory overload. Like, everywhere you look, it's just like this crazy amount of input.
Yeah.
You know?
And that's the hard part when people ask me about the trip. Like, I struggle to talk about it, not because there's not stuff to talk about, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
Like, there's like a freaking slideshow playing in my head of everything that happened. I'm like, do you start there? Do you start there? Do you start there? Like, I've really struggled to describe the trip.
I was going to say, and then it's like, and then if you do, you're like, how do I explain this? Like, and I think that's why.
Just watch the film.
Just watch the
Just
film.
watch the film.
Watch the film, listen to this podcast, start planning.
2 films.
Two
films.
Dose films.
Brad's got one.
Oh, yeah, Brad, you guys were filming as well. So we kind of split up. So we kind of have 2 separate stories.
Competing. Are we gonna do competing films? Release on the same day?
I'd like to say complimenting films, Brad.
I would like to say that too. I'm joking, Mark.
Um,
It is hard. I will say it is very hard to describe an experience that it's only you kind of had to be there to understand what it was like. But I do think the films that I think both of us will put out will help paint a visual picture that will give people that are listening to this maybe a better sense of what it was like than you in a way that you can't just describe with words. You have to like see it. You really have to be there, but I think seeing it will give you a much better sense of it.
Absolutely.
for sure.
Yep.
Watch the film. Listen to this. Watch the film. Be inspired. Plan your trip. Commit to it. I'd say at least a year in advance, like you said, Brad. And
Pick some friends.
Pick some good friends that you can depend on.
And get on the plane.
Buy some good gear. Get on the plane.
And
Get
let
home
us know what
safe.
that trip is. Drop it in the comments.
Yeah. What is that? If it's this trip or a different trip, what's that trip for you?
Yeah. Let us
And
know.
follow up with us if you go. We want to hear about it.
And invite us.
Yeah.
We're fun.
Marky Bear's down to party.
I like to party. Well, on that note, Brad, unless you have anything else, we're all fun. Hopefully enjoyed this podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Maybe we'll see you on the mountain. Bye, everybody.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.